Most pedig folytatjuk a délutáni programot. Chris Fowler lesz az első előadónk, aki a Washingtoni Creative Science Labs elnök helyettese, és a pro bono hálózatok építéséről fog beszélni.
Good morning, and thank you, Andras, for inviting me to speak with you today. As I was just introduced, I am the vice president of an organization called Creative Science Labs, but I'm brought here under different auspices. I work in a pro bono capacity with the BMW Foundation and serve as the chapter head of the U.S. chapter of the Responsible Leaders Network, which is a program that the BMW Foundation has, which I'll describe in greater detail later in the presentation. Another side job I have, which is also done on a pro bono basis, is I am board chair for a nonprofit in the United States that trains first and second generation Americans to run for public office. So when you talk about issues of social justice, we're working to close the representation gap in leadership in America, and it's something that we feel is really important. So today we'll be talking about, or I hope to share with you, three things. And what I'll say actually at the onset is that I'm really appreciative for where I am speaking in the program, because Jenny did a great job sort of laying the foundation, and the other speakers after shared from an institutional standpoint or from an organizational standpoint how to engage in and grow pro bono. And my comments today are going to be more focused on things that you can do as an individual, as a person that hopes to engage in pro bono, and using networks as a way to do that. So we'll be talking about how networks can be used to grow the practice of pro bono, and what kinds of networks you might think about engaging in. Secondly, we'll talk about your selfish interest in being known as a giver or being an advocate of pro bono in those networks. And then lastly, I'll share some of my personal experience and give a couple of ideas for those that would like to start a small pro bono movement here in Hungary, maybe some ideas that you can take home. So, why networks? As an individual actor, starting a big movement can be really difficult. You know, at best you try to come up with some sort of message that reaches a broad audience, and you share that message and hope that you can attract the right kind of people. That can be really difficult, and from an organizational standpoint can be quite expensive and at times ineffective. So today we're going to talk about an alternate strategy where you can use the power of networks to spread both the concept and practice of pro bono. You could say that working through a network is meeting people where they are, finding a common interest, and then using pro bono as a way to engage to help support those causes. And the benefits of networks are multiple. You not only have immediate access to the members of that network, but you also have access by proxy to the people that they know through the networks that they're involved with. So when it comes to one of the things that can provide a lot of value to nonprofits in terms of making strategic introductions, having access to greater networks or a greater number of networks can be very beneficial. So when we think about the kinds of networks that you might engage with, I tend to think of things in terms of networks of affiliation and networks of affinity. Networks of affiliation are those institutions or bodies that you belong to and you have some sort of membership or association with. So for instance, I went to graduate school at Syracuse University, and I'm very involved with the Syracuse University alumni group in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm from. You also have, you know, at least in the academic, sector in the United States, you have fraternities and sororities, many of which have social actions and volunteerism opportunities. But the area that I think is most rife and the best opportunity to introduce pro bono are through networks of affinity. These are groups that you belong to because you have shared interests. So these may be book clubs, social organizations, perhaps even community organizations that you belong to here in Hungary. It's important to think about the number of networks that you can or have belonged to. Many of us, as we go through our professional lives, we stay most engaged with those people in the networks that we have the most recent engagement with. Those are often filled with people that have similar makeup to us. So when we think about using networks to engage people through pro bono, it might be helpful to think about those dormant ties, those older networks that you once had a connection to. Because as time has gone by, those people have developed new skills, new experiences that could add a lot of value to a pro bono movement. So we've discussed at this point some of the merits of spreading pro bono through networks and have given a few examples of the kinds of networks that might be helpful to engage. But now let's talk about why you might be interested in taking this forward. There's a gentleman called Adam Grant that wrote a wonderful book called Give and Take. And in this book, he makes a very clear case for being known as a giver. I was really appreciative of some of the comments that Zoltan had made earlier. In an environment where everyone is resource hungry or interested in going out and going after the money, you know, what benefit might there be to being known as a giver? So in this book, Adam Grant identifies that people typically fall into one of three categories with how they behave. You have takers, so people that get more than they give. You have matchers who give as much as they get in a quid pro quo basis. And then you have givers, people that selflessly give their time, their energy, and their talents with no expectation that they'll be recompensated or paid back for that. What's interesting is that takers, they're known to, the saying that he uses is kiss up to people in power to make themselves look good, and kick down. So they kiss up and they kick down. And what that means is the people that they work with, they take credit for the work that their team does. So as takers become successful in business and in life, they have treated people poorly along the way. And when they do achieve some level of success, the people that have been treated poorly want to knock them down because they felt like they've gotten there sort of in a dirty way, so to speak. But givers are just the opposite. When they achieve success, they bring people with them. And they bring people along, such that when givers become successful, everyone feels really great about it. And they want to help that person be more successful, and they contribute even further to the success of these people. So there's this interesting dynamic where they did some research in the United States, and they found that givers perform poorly on a number of different levels. Engineering students aren't as productive, medical students perform poorly on tests, and sales professionals don't do as well as takers, who are really money hungry, so to speak. But what's fascinating is that, in fact, the most successful people are also givers. So you have this dynamic, and Zoltan had made mention of this before, where you are building networks and building a reputation. So it's sort of, being a giver is sort of like being, I call it slow capitalism. It's something that is going to pay off, but on a much longer horizon. So it takes the the effect where, we're running a marathon and not running a sprint. And this is the dynamic when, because you're, particularly if you become known as a giver in the networks that you're involved in, and people see that you give selflessly of your time and energy, that is like money in the bank. And it's something that you'll be able to draw on in the future. So we've talked at this point about the kinds of networks that you might engage, and also why you would want to be known as a giver and a proponent of pro bono in those networks. And I think it might be helpful to talk a little bit now about the role that I have with the BMW Foundation. Marcus Hipp, the executive director of the foundation, will be here later today to share the work that they're doing with partners like the Taproot Foundation to really make a global pro bono movement. The program that I'm most involved with is the Responsible Leaders Network, and this is a network where the foundation over the past 25 years has invited leaders that are interested in social impact and social change from a number of different sectors, academia, government, NGOs, and the private sector, to come together and share ideas, best practices. A friend of mine once called it a group of mutual admiration and support, which really captures it well. There are over 1,800 members globally, and there are 225 members in the US chapter. And within the past year, the foundation has started this chapter program, creating chapters in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, and we'll actually be bringing on a few different countries in the near term to help create more and stronger connections between members of the network. So this is the basic profile of the US chapter. As I mentioned, 225 members in total. The majority, many of them are in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, but also, as you can see, in New York, Boston, the Bay Area, and in Southern California. And as I shared, these members come from a number of different sectors. So we have the chairman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, for instance, is a member of our network. Senior officials at the State Department, lead researchers at some of the country's best and most well-known research universities, and folks from media and the nonprofit sector as well. The organization, the BMW Foundation Responsible Leaders Network, in terms of a pro bono program, the most well-known is the impact sessions that we hold. And this is when we invite a member of our network, the leader of a nonprofit, to share with a group of collected members a brief or an overview of their organization, and then share some of the strategic challenges that they face. Those things that might be preventing them from achieving or realizing the full vision. And then there's a facilitated discussion and brainstorming or workshop through which the members of the network share ideas and other potential strategies to help that nonprofit realize their full vision. And at the end, what often happens is, because there's such a high degree of engagement both between the network members and the target organization, that these impact sessions often end with pro bono commitments. So we've done a few of these now, most recently in Atlanta, where there was the invited nonprofit was working on STEM education, which is science, tech, engineering, and math, and bringing STEM education to disadvantaged schools. And he was having a problem, as many nonprofits do, with resources and making sure that his labs were stocked with the proper equipment. And one of the members of our network made a pro bono commitment at the end, and he said, "I'm personal friends with Michael Dell. I will call him tomorrow, and I'll see to it that you have Dell laptops in all of your labs." And that's a really powerful commitment, and one that is only available through networks. And again, to the earlier point, it's not just the people that are in the room, but the people that they're connected to that can bring value to the process. Other engagements, members of our network committing to join the board of organizations, and then I'll share briefly, one experience that I've led, which is through the rebranding of a nonprofit. There's this organization that had been called Waste Enterprisers. They're an African-based NGO that takes human waste and turns it into a renewable energy source. The name Waste Enterprisers wasn't giving them, and their brand wasn't giving them it wasn't sufficient in terms of reaching audiences and sharing what they did. So I led, through the network, along with other network members, a pro bono effort, an international pro bono effort, to rebrand the organization, rename them, and provide them with marketing materials and a new website that will help them reach the audiences that they want to get after. And it was a fascinating project. As I said, we did the naming and branding I led in Washington, D.C. We worked with a graphic designer in Dubai to help produce visual content for the website. We worked with a videographer and a motion storyteller in Shanghai to produce videos for the website. And it was all possible through pro bono. But I'd really like to give you something that you can take home and perhaps start on your own here in Hungary. So I'm really excited to share this new potential approach with you because I'm excited to roll it out within our own network. There's a man called Jeffrey Walker, I believe, and he was the former executive director of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, based in Monticello, Virginia, not far from where I live. And back in the day, Thomas Jefferson, who was the third president of the United States, used to have these wonderful dinner parties where the invited guests would have really rich discussions and would often come out of those dinners with things to follow up on. So Walker has put together this idea called a Jeffersonian dinner, where you would have rich discussion and debate and come away with action items. And it's not an average dinner party. And I'll show you how in just a moment. In order to have a successful dinner party, you need a great recipe. And here's where we'll get into things that you guys can do when you go home. So the ingredients for this recipe are 8 to 15 members of your network. 12 is a really great number. And to include the leader of an NGO or someone that's actively working on a cause that you're interested in. And ideally, you also have a common interest between the people in this network. So in the example that he gives in his TED Talk, they picked education. So the next ingredient is how the dinner is run. Many dinner parties, in fact, probably all of them that you've ever been to, if you were to invite 12 guests, you would have 6 different side conversations and not a lot of coordination between the discussion. But that's not what makes a Jeffersonian dinner work. A Jeffersonian dinner is marked by a whole table discussion where where one person speaks at a time. And what this does is it really increases the connection that you have to each member at the table, and also increases your connection to the issue that you're talking about. So in advance of the dinner, you would send to the invited guests a question that everyone would open up by responding to. They would have 2 minutes to provide a response. And the question should be one that provokes a story. So in the example of education or education reform, the first question might be, who is your favorite teacher and why? And then each member at the table would have an opportunity, 2 minutes, to share their story. And along the way, the connection that you feel to the other people at the table and the connection that you feel to education is increasing as the night goes on. You would end, the invited NGO leader would speak last, and they would tell their personal story and then transition into why that was their calling to start their nonprofit. And it takes the narrative from me, telling my personal story, to one of us, and then we. The second question that you would ask, the moderator would identify those threads that were common throughout and provoke further conversation that, again, increases the engagement with the network as you go along. And towards the end of the conversation, you have the opportunity to mix and moderate. And towards the end of the meeting, towards the end of the dinner, you might, the moderator would ask, well, what are those things that you would like to work on when you go home? What are those things that you would like to follow up with as a product of this really rich discussion? And invariably, if you've got the right people at the table and there's a really quality engagement, and that engagement and the connection that the people feel to each other and to the issue, it's likely that pro bono commitments will come out of this. Well, there's someone that I know that I can introduce you to that would be really interested in moving this forward. Or I want to devote my time to help you achieve your goals. So does anyone here like eating dinner? I mean, we all like eating dinner. And the thing that I really appreciate about the Jeffersonian dinner is that it's something that we can all do, and it's a start. So in summary, I hope I shared with you why networks might be a good place to start as you try to grow pro bono in your country. What kind of networks to engage, both old and new. And we've covered why your self-interest would be aligned with being known as a giver in those networks. And since we've all established that we eat dinner, I'll just remind you, you don't have to start a movement, you just have to start dinner. So thank you.
And please don't go anywhere just yet, because we have a couple of minutes also for questions. Tehát ismét felhívom a figyelmet, hogy van egy mikrofonunk, ami körbejár a teremben. Ha valaki kérdezni, várja meg, különben a szinkrontolmács nem hallja, hogy mit fordítson. Kézfeltartással jelezzék, hogyha lenne kérdés. And while we're waiting for people to make up their minds on questions, I have one of my own. I was very interested in how you described the givers and takers mechanism, and how some givers seem to lose out while others really excel. And I was wondering whether the basic lesson of that is that you should first assess your own talent, and if you're very talented and very productive, then you should be a giver and you will succeed even more. But if you look in the mirror and you know in your heart that you're actually a bit mediocre, then you're better off just staying a taker.
Well, it's interesting. I'm not sure that self-assessment is baked into the book, but the book does provide a number of resources or ways to think about your own personal skills and helping make the determination if you are a matcher, which many of us are. You know, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Things that you might be able to do, questions that you might be able to ask, skills that you can better develop to become more of a giver. And many of
Any
those...
advice on how to become a more successful giver? Because it seems that this is a risky business, according to that book.
A lot of it is time management. They do a profile of a number of really successful givers, and one of those just says, you know, I would do something, you know, I would give 5 minutes of my time to anyone to help them with anything. And that's one of the most sort of consistent hallmarks of the givers that are profiled in the book. They begin by asking the question, you know, how can I help you? And then they attentively listen. And oftentimes, you know, making an introduction to someone or taking a look at a business plan These things that can be very helpful to people at times can take no more than 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. És itt egy kérdés Andrásnál.
Until the next question, I have a question. As you are involved with the BMW network, do you see big differences in different parts of the world in these trends, or it's kind of a global trend that you can notice in many different parts of the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that most of my engagement has been within the U.S. chapter, and there are certain challenges that are presented just in terms of geography. Within that network in particular, you also have this dynamic where, as I mentioned, some of the members of the network, their last engagement with the foundation was some 25 years ago. So the chapter program was just initiated within the past year. So I have to do the work of creating more opportunities for engagement. The way that I think about it, it's sort of like laying down layers of paint or primer, actually. So, every time that we reach out and create a network event or send an email, we're increasing incrementally the engagement and the connection that the people in the network have with the foundation and with the other members of the network. So in large part, it's very much an effort to prime the pump and get people ready to take action, which is probably common to many networks that we're all involved with. There are varying levels of engagement. So in some ways, in terms of the geographical difference, it's important, I've found, to find really engaged local actors who can influence their own networks where they live.
Is there like a know-how package that people can download off your page on the internet, perhaps, if they're interested in setting up similar networks or organizations?
Well, not a package, but I will make myself available. So I'd encourage you to shoot me an email, and we can set up a phone conversation. I'd love to help talk to you and share some of my experience and see how I might be able to help you engage your networks here in Hungary.
Thank you very much.